about Perl6. I'm sure that's going to shock everybody who's been to any of these talks in the last year or so. Because I really like it, and I figure I'm just going to keep talking about it. People might start using it. We've actually written some which we got paid for recently.
Really?
Great, yes. So today I'm going to cover some stuff about using Perl6 on the command line, similarities between it and Perl5, and also differences and things you can do with it. So hi, yeah, I'm Simon Proctor. You can find me in most places as Simon. I'm a senior developer at Zoopla. We are hiring, we're always hiring. And I'm addicted to Perl6. I have my chameleon. I also have the Learning Perl6 by Brian Foy with me today, if anybody wants to take a look at it, see what it's like. And I will now begin, he says. So, straight in. If you're running Perl6 on the command line, there's a few command line switches that are very similar to the Perl5 ones. There's also a huge amount that you can't use, they don't do anything. And there's some others that are there, but they're not actually that useful for command line stuff. They're more useful for if you're wanting to test performance and all this kind of thing. So at the top we have -E, which is the same as -E in Perl5, in that it enables strict and you can use say. The annoying thing is that -E doesn't work in Perl6. So if you do like I do and flip between Perl5 and Perl6 command line stuff on a regular basis, you keep having Perl5 throw errors because you didn't use -E. But there you go. Yeah, Perl6 has strict and warnings on by default all the time whenever you're writing scripts. You don't have to worry about it. -N works pretty much the same as the Perl5 one. The only thing to bear in mind is that when it's reading from the file, it automatically chunks the new line off the end of the line. So, and -P, similar, except for it also calls a gist on the value. So, I'll just say now, this is a new experiment for me, actually doing coloured slides. If people want to tell me afterwards what they thought of it, feel free. Yeah, so gist is an object value that any object has that basically produces a human-readable stringified version. So -P will call gist on your thing, and using say, so it means it puts the new line back on again. So effectively, if you're using -N or -P, it will just loop through all the lines, removing the new lines, putting them back on again, so you'll end up with the same file. You will notice that there isn't -I for in-place editing, so you can't do in-place editing on a file with it and like having the automatic backup thing. That doesn't do that at the moment. I don't know if there's any plans to add it. -I is path, so you can like define a path for a library, pretty standard there. And -M, you can do module loading in advance rather than having to do users at the beginning. Yeah, so they, like I say, big list of ones that aren't there, but most of them I was reading through and I was going like, does anybody use these? If any of your favourite command line switches are not listed here, chances are you're going to have to start writing it in the actual command. There's also the Perl6 lib environment variable, which you can set, again, instead of using -I. That can be useful if you're running prove, because you can do prove and then run Perl6 as the executable, and then have Perl6 lib. If you use that MI6 for your development, it's not a problem, because that does it automatically. All with me so far. Cool. So, when you're running a script on the command line, or basically any script, you have two dynamic variables called args and arg files. So args is an array of all the arguments passed to the program. They are strings, but the array is not typed. That can be important if you're passing the args file to another function. If the other function is expecting a typed array, it will error because of the way that Perl type works on arrays and stuff. You also have $arg files. Now this one's quite interesting. You've got a thing called an IO-cat handler, and what that does is it basically, you give it a list of paths, which can be either strings or they can be open file handles, there can be a few different objects. And what it will do is, when you call things like lines on it, or read, or any of the various path functions on it, it will open the first file, do that to the first file, and then when that file's done, it will move on to the second one. So it will basically just slurp every single one of the files that you pass to it in one go. So when you call your command line script, all of your arguments are passed to arg files, which if you then call it, will then try and read them as files. So it won't attempt to, so if you like call a command line and you pass it in a bunch of numbers because you've written a script to do some multiplication or something, to do some sums, it won't attempt to open files with those numbers and like throw an error, unless you tell it to. But it's quite useful. The interesting thing is, so what you've got is, you've got IO arg files, which is the original object, but then they decided this was such a cool idea, they made the IO cat handle, and IO arg files is now just a sort of a wrapper around it. It doesn't have any additional functionality. But yeah, it's really interesting. I only found out about that a few days ago when I was writing the slides. But yeah, it lets you can just pile in a bunch of things and read them more easily. Lazy evaluation, because that's really nice. If you don't pass in any arguments, then arg files is set to $in, so you can pipe to your command line script. If you don't pass it any file arguments, it will read from standard input. So, cool. So now this is all pretty standard-ish with your Perl stuff. I mean, you write a script, you read from args, you do some stuff with all this kind of stuff. Now we get on to the bits where Perl6 gets really different. Main. So if your function, or if your script has a subroutine called main in it, then that will be called as your starting point in the function. Now you notice here I've defined 3 using multi-sub, and it's perfectly allowed to do that. Now, I haven't thrown any code in there because I didn't really want. I just wanted to demonstrate the sort of different ways you can do it. So in this first case, I'm reading all of the arguments and putting them into an array called files. Now, I might want to do this instead of using arg files because I perhaps want to check that they actually exist before I pass them to arg files, because arg files really doesn't like it if you give it paths that don't exist. In this case, I'm expecting 2 positional arguments, and if that was the only main sub, then this would throw an error. Well, it wouldn't throw an error. I'll explain what it will do in a second. But what it will do is, if you pass it 2 arguments, it will assign one to file 1 and one to file 2. So that's maybe if you want to like do a file copy or something, or a comparison or some kind of stuff. And then finally, we've got a named argument there. So this would accept either -s or -s or -size even as named arguments, and would assign the value that you put to it to that variable that you can then access within the main function. So what it does is it takes the args object and maps it into the signature, and there's a few rules that it applies to do that. But it does mean that you're allowed to modify your args values before your main subroutines. So if you can basically change some of the args if you want. So for instance, if you were going to do stuff with files, you could maybe check the args list to make sure that they're all existing and throw away any that aren't. So you only work on the existing files and stuff. All the inputs go to string, except if the input matches either an int rational complex number or floating point number, then you'll be mapped to what's called an allomorph, which is a thing that looks like both a string and the thing, so like an integer or a string. And anything that's expecting a string will be fine with it, anything that's expecting an integer will be fine with it, and the type system will just be happy. So that's quite nice and lets you get around all of that stuff. So that's quite useful. One thing to look out for is name parameters. If you define a name parameter, there's nothing stopping someone calling it multiple times. And if they call it multiple times, then the variable you get will be an array object. Whereas if they only call it once, you'll get a scalar object. So a single thing. Now, the annoying thing with that, and I had a little discussion about this the other day on the IRC, is if you assign an array to a named argument, so if that was @s instead of $s, it will error unless you give it at least 2 arguments, because it won't accept 1 argument for an array. I think that's a bug, and I'm going to try and get that fixed, because I think that's a bit crazy. Arrays should have more than 1 argument. But there are ways you can get around that. I'll cover it in a later bit. You can also, if you want, grab any named arguments that you haven't touched already, that you haven't mentioned already, and just stick them all into the Slurpee hash, which anybody who was at my previous talk on doing these kind of things would know about. So yeah, so that's main. Main is really cool. You can, like I say, do multiple stuff, as I will now demonstrate next time. I loved it. This is another thing I love about it. So if you call your function and you've got a main sub, but the arguments you pass don't match the main sub, then it will generate an well, first thing it will do is it will attempt to call a subroutine called usage. If usage doesn't exist, then it will generate a string called $usage. That's a dynamic variable, you don't really have to worry about it too much. But it will generate that automatically based on your signatures. So it will look at all of your mains and it will go, oh, you've got this, you've got this, you've got this, you've got this, great, superb. Now here's the fun bit. In Perl6 you have what are called, I think they're called pod comments. These are basically comments that are also pod and that attach to the code. So hash pipe, you put, well, I've got a demonstration in a sec here, but hash pipe you put before the thing you're documenting, hash equals you put after the thing you're documenting. And it will basically pull out those pod documentations and use them to make your usage. One thing you can do is you can also flag a main subroutine with the is hidden from usage thing, which as far as I know right now is not documented anywhere, and I have no idea why, because it's really useful. Because what that will do is it will just skip that main sub, and I'll show you in the demonstration why that could be useful. So here I've got 3 main subs. So this one here is the important one. It says sum up some numbers, sorry, I realize it's a bit small. Sum up some numbers, multi-sub main, it's expecting a bunch of things. I'm saying numbers, I'm not doing any testing in it or anything. And then after it I've got hash equals a list of numbers. I've also got up here multi-sub main h question mark, so that's saying if I get called and all I'm passed is either an attribute called h or or nothing, then call the usage function. And this one's saying if I'm passed an attribute called h and anything else, then call the usage function, otherwise call the main function. And the usage function gives me a little string and then says the auto-created usage string. And over here, that is the output that this file creates if you call it with no arguments or with -h as an argument. Prints out that, you see, and it's really quick and easy to write self-documenting command line code, which is pretty cool, I thought. I'm going through this quite quick, which is going to be great for that. 2 minutes, great, all right, okay. Well, that's great, because this is the last slide. So here's a few other little tips and tricks that can be quite useful. In Perl6 you've got begin, end, you've got a bunch of other things that are called phases, and they're very similar to Perl5, like begin and end blocks and stuff. They work slightly differently. You don't actually have to do them in blocks, for instance. But you can use a thing where combining state variables and end allows you to use -n to loop through everything, put some data into a state variable, and then in an end phaser print out the state variable at the end. So that's quite nice and simple because it will keep the value all the way through it. Sub main opts only has one. This is another dynamic variable you can set. It's an array or hash even. It's only got one key at the moment that you can set in it, which is called named anywhere. If you set that to true, then it allows you to put named arguments anywhere you like in the input. Otherwise, the named arguments have to appear in the place that they're defined in the signature. So that can be quite helpful. I generally throw that in whenever I'm writing command line script. This is a nice little subtype. Like I was saying about if you want to have a named parameter, but you're sure there's only one, this subtype single, where you're doing a sub of any, so you're saying it can be any value, but it's not positional. So I want anything that's not positional, positional being array, list, such and such. So in this case, if you defined a named variable and said it's single, then it would error if somebody tried to put multiple ones of that in on the command line. Subsets.io, worth having a look at. This is a module that includes a bunch of predefined subsets for pretty much any file path test that you want to make. So if you want to test if a path is a writable directory, then you just stick iopath.dw in front of the path and it will basically use the type system to check whether or not that's true. And the final bit that I would say is if you are doing any Perl6 command line scripting, you want to, as soon as possible, take all of the code out of command line script, stick it in a module and then use the module, and then just call the functions in the module, because modules, similar to Python, are pre-compiled, so you don't have the whole compilation step. And there we go. Questions?